Welcome to the podcast. I'm Angela Bobier, and this is Life in the Talbot Settlement, brought to you by Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. In this series, we will do our best to give you a full appreciation of the history of Western Elgin County in southwestern Ontario, from First Nations to the early settlers to the 1950s. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge funding from Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Welcome to episode 29, about social hierarchies within our community, and what did Sir, Colonel, and other titles mean. Throughout our previous podcasts, you've probably heard numerous social honorifics in the form of titles and prefixes thrown around. Sir this, Mr. that, Colonel Talbot. But do you know what those honorifics mean? If you've ever been curious about how these prefixes dictate the social hierarchies of the Talbot settlement, you've come to the right place. Please enjoy this podcast as we cover the meanings, origins, and privileges of the different titles used in the mid-1800s. Let's start with Sir. Governed by law, the traditional use of the title Sir signifies knighthood. This subsequently extended to baronets, a hereditary honour holding office under the British Crown. But since the late modern era, the end of the 18th century onwards, Sir has been used as an address for any man with military rank or higher social status than oneself. The use of Sir and the women's equivalent, ma'am, is a sign of respect. The omission of the title, when due, is an offensive slight. Colonel. Anyone who has come across this title can agree that the word is a strange one. Colonel. What is that middle L doing there? The etymological origins of the title help us to understand the peculiarity of the word colonel. From Italian origin, colonna, translating to column or of a column, the spelling progression of the word is apparent, the meaning less so. Although the direct translation is similar in form, it doesn't immediately transcend into English. But at the end of the medieval period, a military company was known as a column of an army, and therefore the colonel is the leader of a section of troops or army column. Colonel is once again a military rank, a high-ranking officer sitting above lieutenant and below a general, and you've heard us often refer to Col Thomas Talbot. Let's move on and talk about some of the titles that women were given. Mrs. MRS. was historically pronounced mistress and used to address higher social class adult women, regardless of their marital status. The colloquial understanding of the term mistress is fickle and contextual. The primary definitions for its use is a woman that governs subject and servant, hence the relation to the upper class. This transcended to all female leads of a household. Under the category of subject and servant is an overseen capital. So farmers and businesswomen were automatically referred to as Mrs. However, there was a second meaning to the prefix not so kindly implied, and that is for the frequented prostitute, affair, or loose-moraled woman. Until the late 1800s, the title Miss was used to designate the age of an upper-class woman. Girls were Miss, and to call an adult woman Miss would again be implying that they were a prostitute. As young girls are not masters of a trade, nor do they own property, their title is purely that of status. Which name the title Miss was paired with signified her birth order in relation to any sisters. Miss, accompanied by only the surname, denoted the eldest daughter, and any younger sisters would be Miss followed by their first and last name. For example, before the death of Eliza Ann Backus, she would have been Miss Backus, and her younger sister was Miss Mary Backus. Master was the male equivalent of Miss, and was only used for boys with high social status. Lower-class women, or women towards the bottom of social hierarchies, were not afforded prefixes, and referred to by their names alone, and often only their first name. Mr. was anyone above one's own social class. If they did not have the title of Sir or My Lord, this lessened over time as the title was extended to an individual's equals and then to all men. Lord and Lady. These are not titles we come across as frequently, reserved for those who have received an appointment to the House of Lords, in England, nominated through nobility. Our own large areas of land and overseeing residents. The closest use to this title here today is landlord. And during the 19th century, in the Talbot settlement, the title of lord was not officially obtainable, although occasionally used by workers, especially in the northern Scottish areas of the settlement, to refer to their boss, although this title was not officially recognized. Gentleman. When we hear the term gentleman, the first thing that comes to mind is a courteous and polite man. But the word was also used as a title, denoting an individual as rightfully able to bear arms, although not a member of the gentry or holding rank in the military. This honorific title is rarely seen used as a standalone, but precedes the individual's pronouns such as Mr. or Sir. For example, the gentleman, Mr. Smith. Alternatively, the title is used as the adjective we know it as today. In some census records, you can see some people's occupation is listed as gentleman. Captain. Like Militia Regiment Captain Leslie Patterson or Captain Gilman Wilson, 1st Regiment Middlesex Militia, captain simply means commander. And that is a commander of pretty well anything. In our examples, it refers to the commander of a military unit. But you could be the captain of any type of vessel too, from boats and airplanes to spaceships and submarines. Now, in the early Talbot settlement, the boats make sense, but clearly we did not have airplanes, spaceships, or subs. The title of captain is given regardless of the size of the regiment, and simply, he is the leader. Now, other titles such as general or major general are also military ranks, but didn't carry over into everyday life, and were only used for someone when they were actively serving in that position. With all these social honorifics, it feels so easy to make a mistake. Using the incorrect title could cause offense and social rife. So next time you use a social title, what historic message are you sending? Social class is determined by several factors: economic activity, amount of income, the type and amount of formal education, residency, recreational activity, and membership in associations. Most individuals with higher social class become members at birth, though it was possible to enter later in life. Though the factors above help determine one's social class, it can also be reciprocated. Someone's class can determine the type and amount of formal education they receive, and in turn, the type of formal education one receives can help determine what class they're in. Social mobility was the standard of mobility between classes. Changing mobility on the same level of status is referred to as horizontal mobility. Movement either up or down status levels was called vertical social mobility. Vertical mobility is possible if society is of open class. One was not judged from sharing and taking part in similar interests to those of a lower or higher class. Everyone would be welcome to converse and act in a similar fashion. Here in small settlements of Ontario, Canada, this was almost entirely the case. In Europe, any member of a noble family was entitled to bear coat of arms and considered nobility. This practice among the aristocracy resulted in enormous numbers of titled families whose descendants married only amongst members of their titles. In Europe, mingling with people of lower status was seen as a horrible act, and those who did not uphold their family's class could have horrible consequences. Individuals who acted out of turn were shunned by the rest of their social class. Not only would the individual be punished, but the whole family name could be ruined. A person of higher class exercised a disproportionate influence over the lives of those below them. In our area, most families, even if they were of higher social class, chose not to participate in the long-held practices of status. For example, Col Thomas Talbot was of Irish nobility. The colonel was a simple man, in the words of the settlers. Quote, Talbot baked his own bread, milked his own cows, made his own butter and cheese, washed his own clothes, and ironed and dressed his own linen. End quote. Despite being aristocratic and living his life around nobility. When Talbot's nephew, Colonel Richard Airy, came to visit in 1847, he was astounded to see Talbot's habits and clothing. This displeased Airy, and he eventually left the Talbot estate and ventured back to England, where he could be surrounded by his luxuries. With all of these social honorifics, it feels so easy to make a mistake. Using the incorrect title could cause offense and social rife. Next time you use a social title, what historic message are you sending? I want to thank our past Assistant Museum Manager, Avery Voivoden, for putting together this podcast episode of Titles and Class. Please share the podcast with your friends and follow us on all social media platforms at Backus-Page House. The Backus-Page House Museum and Tyrconnell Heritage Society acknowledges the land we are on today as the traditional territory of First Nations people. As settlers at a settler-focused museum, we value both the significant historical and contemporary contributions of all Original peoples and ask how we can be supportive in Indigenous cultural renewal. Life in the Talbot Settlement is a production of Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Your host has been Angela Bobier, music provided by Jack Witmer, and thanks to our producer, Katlyn Reintsma. To make a charitable donation, become a Tyrconnell Heritage Society member, and to contact the Backus-Page House Museum, please visit our website, www.backuspagehouse.ca. Thank you again for listening.